Mr. Pollack, is President Trump trying to play both hands, trying to have more military presence in the region, while at the same time, see, I'll extend that olive branch to you, President Kim, in DPRK?
Well, Tianwei, it's good to talk to you again. President Trump says many things. The Washington Post today has an entire section devoted to the publication of every tweet that he has uttered since he's been president of the United States. And there are, I think the number may run to the thousands. So it's important not to overreact to this, although I would say one thing that's important to note, that there's a lineage for this. Bill Clinton came very, very close to traveling to North Korea at the very end of his presidency. Indeed, Secretary of State Albright encouraged him to do so. He decided it was not appropriate, even though that was kind of the high point in U.S.-North Korea relations. So there's that. There's the fact that subsequently, at different times, Kim Il-sung met with former President Jimmy Carter on the cusp of the possible North Korean nuclear crisis in the 1990s. Bill Clinton traveled to North Korea to bring home several American reporters who had been captured by the North Koreans. So you could argue, in some sense, this would follow logically on that members in the Kim dynasty would feel validated by the presence of a president, preferably active, but sometimes former, may do. But I think it's very important to bear in mind here that Trump says many, many things.
I see.
He may be trying to dangle something to Kim, but it would require Kim to take unprecedented steps that thus far he shows no desire to undertake if any American president would even remotely contemplate this possibility.
Right. Mr. Zhao, here in Beijing, China, of course, the foreign ministry welcomed already at least this tweet by President Trump. But at the same time, you see within the administration, there are mixed voices. President Trump sent this tweet, but at the same time, or said that during an interview, he even honored to meet with the North Korean leader. But at the same time, his administration, particularly his spokesperson of the White House, walked back immediately after he made that remark. Is Washington going to present a mixed picture to Pyongyang? Or this is one of those stories of Trump saying more than he should, and then the spokesperson walking it back?
Well, I think, personally, I think Trump is serious in having some engagement with Mr. Kim. He said very good words about Mr. Kim. He said he's a smart cookie. I think he's interested in knowing this young leader better. And he believes that he can develop some interesting relationship with him that is beneficial to the American interests. And also, I think the current administration's North Korea policy after dropping the strategic patience is to impose maximum pressure and then engage with North Korea. So I think Mr. Trump might disagree with his senior staffs on when is the right point to offer dialogue, because if you maintain the maximum pressure for too long, North Korea might, disbelieve and believing that it has to provoke even more. But if you do not maintain enough pressure for enough period of time, you might not get the maximum results from the pressure. So maybe his staff believe that we still need to wait for longer before offer dialogue.
Yeah. I did notice, Mr. Zhao, when you answer a question, you use many, maybe, and maybe. So having heard that, Ms. Panova, do you think it is a strategic confusion that Washington is trying to create, or strategic ambiguity? There's a huge difference, of course, between these two.
Well, I would say this is probably both. To put the words, I should say that, well, Trump, if you remember how he came into power, right? To my view, he came as a revolt against the establishment. So he's an anti-establishment president, and this allows him to actually break down the Gordian knots of quite a few problems if he has enough power, enough political capital, and enough kind of resolve to do that. And even though this is probably not the time when Trump is to meet Kim Jong Un at this point, but the mere talk about it and the mere kind of preparedness of President Trump to talk about such a possibility, and he speaks freely of any other instance like that. This is the way to break down the tradition, the way to break down the crisis, probably, and lead to some kind of solution to it. Our first counterpart spoke rightly about President Clinton coming close to actually mending the ties with a North Korean issue. And I'm remembering it as well because Russia was one of their, and personally Putin was one of those.
Professor Panova, talking about Russia,
took part in talking to North Korea.
Yeah, we did notice, Professor Panova, that Russian President Putin, after meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, talked specifically about the DPRK nuclear issue. He said still talks and dialogue really is the way to go, and this is the right time. There were earlier, Professor Panova, if you want me to be frank, rumors about whether DPRK want to divide the 6 parties involved in the 6-party talks by getting ever closer to Russia. Obviously, with the open statement from Russian president, it seems that things are going not necessarily that way. So, President Putin, what do you think Professor Panova is trying to make here? Is he trying to talk about the timing is exactly right? How much can Russia push about a dialogue or talk of some sort?
Well, probably Russia is not in the strongest position in order to move North Korea closer to any decision in the proper direction, right? But obviously Russia wants to be sustainable in terms of saying that it wants only diplomacy and negotiations, and it does have ties with North Korea. And being mostly in Vladivostok, I see that, for example, there are quite a few North Korean migrants, labor migrants working in the country. So, and this is economically sustainable for North Korea. So Russia also has a way of cooperating politically, economically with North Korea, and obviously plays a role in that. And also for Russia, it is vital that along its borders in Asia Pacific and its neighborhood, it keeps stable. So for this, and obviously Putin's statement is just supporting their proper development of events, and that is why I think Trump's words can be only welcome, especially after this alert and alarm that everybody had with their North American fleet coming to close and exercising.
That's right. Therefore, the timing is extremely important, Mr. Pollack. How is the debate about timing to have dialogue and talk in Washington now? Where are you stand?
Well, there are a couple of things we need to bear in mind. First of all, the talk of all the increased tensions in U.S. military deployments, this is seasonal. This happens every year. Every March and April, the United States conducts major joint exercises with the Republic of Korea. Every March and April, North Korea threatens to blow up the White House, attack South Korea, makes all kinds of threatening noises. I don't trivialize these things. They have an inherent danger, and so there is always a risk of miscalculation. But we've been here before.
But
I could walk you back through many
Pollack,
years.
I have to remind you that it is possibly during the Trump administration that North Korea, if continuing on the current path, could develop ICBM and could reach the United States. That is the huge difference that we are talking about here compared to, let's just say, decades of DPRK nuclear issue.
It could be, but I think that that it is premature to assume such a capability. And I would note, Tianwei, that if the concern in the near term was the possibility that North Korea would conduct a 6th nuclear test and conduct a long-range missile test, they have done neither. And that's a good thing that they haven't done them. So the question is whether you can build on that.
So your suggestion, I'm just trying to figure out what you are thinking right now, Mr. Pollack, because you are one of those very influential scholars in the U.S. about this. What are you thinking? So you're saying nothing important at this point. Let's just leave it like that. Or is the United States taking the time to build this military around the region so that eventually, at the proper time, as the U.S. see it, take military action? What exactly is going on right here?
I see zero possibility, zero, that the United States will conduct anything preemptive against North Korea, certainly in the present context. The only context in which that would ever be imaginable would be under a situation of imminent crisis where there are unambiguous indicators of North Korea about to use a long-range missile capability against the United States. I see, all of these things are based on conditions, assuming that North Korea ultimately has that capability. But Tianwei, I must emphasize, there's one factor here we haven't talked about at all, and that is that next week, South Korea will elect new president. And it will very likely be Moon Jae-in. The South Koreans never like decisions to be made over their heads. Anything that happens here, whether it's in terms of initiatives towards North Korea or anything that is thought about at other levels, must have the explicit understanding and concurrence of the government of the Republic of Korea.
Right.
And Japan is also a factor in this, so we cannot ignore those factors.
You made a great point, Mr. Pollack. Mr. Zhao, I want to go to you about that. It is not just a nuclear crisis, it is elections taking place in South Korea. It is elections with a candidate who's likely to win, likely to go warmer relations with North Korea. It's also a crisis, from crisis probably to opportunities at this time, if we could be optimistic here. Mr. Zhao, where are we?
I think we are facing an important historical opportunity. As Mr. Pollack just said, President Clinton failed to have time to go to Pyongyang, have a state head level visit. I think Mr. Trump can avoid making that same mistake by proposing dialogue with Pyongyang sooner rather than later. I think the recent Mr. Trump's statement about engagement might also be influenced by what is developing in South Korea.
Right.
The likelihood of a liberal South Korean president might have convinced Mr. Trump that he has to engage with North Korea in the near future. The point is really what's the right time to propose dialogue. The U.S., also open to dialogue, has also said repeatedly that there are preconditions to be met by North Korea before any engagement to take place. So I think the current postures by all parties, U.S. and North Korea, are all aimed at negotiating the best bargaining chips. What's the best preconditions that North Korea can accept, or from the U.S. perspective, can the U.S. to force North Korea to accept before going into negotiations? I think that's something that more economic sanctions won't be able to change, but more offer of dialogue will go a long way to diffuse the tensions.
Mr. Pollack, I want you to be brief on this, but it's very important. Mr. Pollack, I understand there are already news suggesting that the State Department officials visited President Carter, who used to be quite a go-betweener between North Korea and the United States, and briefed President Carter, the previous president, about the latest situation. Of course, without further statements coming out of it. Are we seeing some kinds of movements going on in Washington about, seeking a different path?
Well, when the administration has said all options are on the table, you could argue that could go in any number of different directions. I think they are casting about for what the possibilities are, but I think we must come back to the fundamental fact. Kim Jong Un has made the possession and the enhancement of missile capabilities and nuclear capabilities an embedded part of his strategic identity and his goals. He's personally identified with this. Unless and until he can demonstrate meaningfully that he is prepared to look at a different future for the DPRK, I think that the possibilities of any kind of bold gesture by the United States are much more remote. That said, the United States has never been averse to dialogue. There's a difference between dialogue and negotiation.
I see. Before we go, I do want to have the other two briefly help us to understand where your country stands. Russia. That Russia is against. On the other hand, Russia concerned about security on the border if DPRK collapse or even military actions began. And also Russia have a very interesting relationship right now with the Trump administration and Washington. So, Professor Panova, how much can Russia play its role and its stakes?
Well, as I said earlier, it's still Russia still has quite a good relation with North Korea. It has a number of not leverages, but obviously points where it can join in, and it will do anything possible for it to play the diplomatic hand into diplomatic hands, so not to allow for any crisis to break out. And even though I would agree that probably the full-scale dialogue between North Korea and United States is still a remote thing, even with all their Trump's anti-establishment and very anti-establishment moves and possibilities. At the same time, I think we can have some more progress on six-party talks if they are, and North Korea might feel safer and try to move forward as well.
All right, very briefly, only 15 seconds for you, Mr. Zhao. What about China? Debate in China after Madam Fu Ying's article as well.
Yeah, I think China has already, over the last few months, greatly stepped up its economic pressure against North Korea by cutting coal export from North Korea, and also reportedly even might have reduced oil export into North Korea.
So your point is?
So the point is, I think China will be very pleased by this recent signal from Washington. China is willing to facilitate any direct engagement between relevant parties, regardless of the format, whether it's six-party talks or 5 or 4-party talks. China is very experienced in hosting these dialogues, as long as other countries allow China to make a contribution.
We have to wrap it up, but we're running out of time. Zhao Tong, Jonathan Pollack, and Victoria Panova, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure we're going to have time to discuss this sometime later in the program.